35 miles northeast of Sydney Harbour. It is cold and the skies are inky black. A fragile floatplane stands on the deck of an I-class submarine of the Japanese Imperial Navy. Its single engine is roaring at full revs as the submarine pitches in a rolling swell and its bow crests the next wave. A powerful charge catapults the floatplane from its launch ramp into the night. After months of highly secret and meticulous planning, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers launch almost 200 planes into the skies in a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Navy Chief Isoroku Yamamoto's bold plan was to destroy the American Pacific Fleet as it lay at anchor. Yamamoto's attack wasn't only from the air. The night before, a special attack flotilla of 5 two-man midget submarines had attempted to penetrate Pearl Harbor. Their efforts lacked nothing in courage, but met no success. One of the midgets was spotted by an American minesweeper and sunk by depth charges a full 75 minutes before the first wave of planes. The remaining midget submarines fared no better. 3 more were lost to depth charge attacks and a 4th ran aground. The midgets sank no ships and all their crews perished, with the exception of Sub-Lieutenant Kazuo Sakamaki, who swam ashore on Oahu. But taken overall, this was a minor setback in a crushingly effective first strike. After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Imperial forces began a devastating sweep through the Pacific, occupying Thailand and destroying the American Far East Air Force in the Philippines. In 3 days, the Japanese Navy had seized control of seas and oceans equivalent to a quarter of the world's circumference. In the days and weeks that followed, Penang, Hong Kong, Singapore, Manila, Batavia, Rangoon, and Mandalay all fell into Japanese hands. With the Japanese armies and navy enjoying an uninterrupted sequence of victories, it seemed as though they were free to pick and choose their next conquest at will. With Darwin having already been bombed, Australian Prime Minister John Curtin pressed for reinforcements.
Gentlemen, the truth is that if we do not strip ourselves to save our country, the enemy will do it for us with ruthless efficiency, imposing upon us a maximum of misery.
With Australia itself seemingly under threat of invasion, a frenzy of defence preparation was unleashed, together with a paper war of propaganda.
We are faced with the handicap of 20 years of ill preparation, a handicap that can only be overcome if we apply to our war effort the same fanatical zeal and patriotism that our enemies are applying to theirs.
Yamamoto knew there would need to be a second decisive battle to complete the work left undone on December the 7th. The location he chose would be Midway Island in the mid-Pacific. As a diversion, Yamamoto wanted something that might persuade the Allies that Japan's southward drive was continuing and that Australia still remained under threat of invasion. To create this diversion, 2 special submarine attack groups were formed. A Western attack group to seek out targets in the Indian Ocean, and the Eastern attack group to assemble at Truk Lagoon, the remote atoll in the South Pacific. In spite of their poor performance at Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto had decided to give the midget submarines a second chance. In late April 1942, the commander of the Eastern Attack Group, Captain Hankyu Sasaki, who led the midget submarine forces in Pearl Harbor, began seeking out Allied warships refitting after the Battle of the Coral Sea. In concert with the I-29, they launched float planes over Suva, Auckland, and the east coast of Australia. After several weeks of careful reconnaissance, the Eastern Attack Group had selected their target. It was to be Sydney.
我々としてはメインの敵はやはりアメリカだったわけで、オーストラリアとアメリカの連絡線、交通連絡線を遮断したかった。
As Sasaki maintained his position in the Pacific, a converted Japanese Imperial Navy seaplane carrier left the Kure naval shipyards in Japan, bound for Truk.
それとアメリカがオーストラリアに基地を作って我々に反撃する、これを阻止したかった。そしてアメリカは米英からオーストラリアを引き離して日本の陣営につける必要があった。
On board the Chiyoda were 8 highly trained submariners who would command and operate the 4 46-ton special submarines stored in her hold. Lieutenant Keiyu Matsuo, 26, was the most senior officer of the 8. In command of the 3 other midgets were Lieutenants Kenshi Chuman, Teiji Yamaki, and Sub-Lieutenant Katsuhisa Ban.
The Eastern Attack Squadron was an elite squadron. These people are especially selected for the service, and they specially trained for it as well. So the crews of those midget submarines were amongst the Imperial Japanese Navy's best in terms of their submarine forces, and if you like in today's terms, their special forces.
Having lost his close friend in the midget attack on Pearl Harbor, Matsuo was well aware of the fate that might befall him, his crewman Suzuku, and petty officers Takeshi Amori, Shizuka Matsumoto, and Mamoru Ashibe, who would crew the last midget.
特殊潜航艇っていうのはやはりその特殊スペシャルっていうだけありまして、本当に特殊な技術を必要とする操縦にですね、特殊な技術を必要とする、また相当な精神力あるいは知識を必要とする、ビークルであったというふうに認識します。ですから、その搭乗員の選抜にあたっても優秀な操艦技術を持った、潜水員、クリュー、それから的確な判断力を持った指揮統率能力を持った艇長が選抜されてきたというふうに認識しています。
As the Chiyoda continued its course for Truk Lagoon, the 4 remaining I-class submarines, which would form the Eastern Attack Group, were carrying out patrol duties off Port Moresby, when on the 11th of May, they were ordered to return to Japan's major naval base in the Pacific, Truk Lagoon, to collect their cargo of 4 midget submarines and the men who would crew them. Then, disaster. On the last leg of her passage back to Truk, the I-28 was sunk by the US submarine Tautog, with the loss of all 101 hands.
On the way to Truk, one of the Japanese submarines was intercepted by an American submarine and attacked and eventually sunk. So that meant that the Japanese had 4 midgets on Truk, but only 3 submarines that could carry them south.
The I-28 was the mother submarine assigned to Sub-Lieutenant Ban and Petty Officer Ashibe's midget. With the mother sub lost, there was no option but to leave the 2 men behind on Truk and continue the mission with 3 midget subs alone. As the Eastern Attack Group entered the first night of their mission, the I-24 surfaced to recharge its batteries. Yamaki, in command of the M24, seized this opportunity to perform maintenance within the midget submarine. When, tragically, as his crewman Matsumoto entered the hatch area, a spark ignited compressed gases from the batteries, triggering an explosion, burning Yamaki and blasting Matsumoto from the hatch. The crew searched for Matsumoto all night. His body was never recovered.
The mother submarine was obliged to return to Truk. As it happened, the Japanese had the spare midget submarine, and so that was attached to the back, and the I-24 then took off at high speed to catch up with the others heading south to Sydney.
With Matsumoto lost, Yamaki understood only too well that in handing over the command of the M24 to Sub-Lieutenant Ban, he was, in all probability, sending a friend to his death. The night is overcast, but the moon is almost full as the 5 I-class mother submarines make rendezvous, some 35 miles off the heads to Sydney Harbour. Now, it only remained for Flying Warrant Officer Susumu Ito and his navigator and observer Iwasaki to reconfirm the location of warships in Sydney Harbour.
シドニーの街コークオートデントがついてる。ああ、これは警戒してないぞというようなことで、それから500メーターで、入っていたんですけどね、なかなか海面の状態がよくわからない。
Warrant Officer Ito flew in low over the heads, 500 metres, descended to 300 metres over the boom nets to inspect the nets, and then proceeded up the harbour at 300 metres.
ハーバーブリッジを越して奥の方に入っていって、仕方がないからちょっと危ないなと思いながら30メーターまで高度下げちゃった。30メーターだったら軍艦のマストより低いですからね。というのは横から見れば見えるんだと知ってますから。
Their float plane is spotted by an artillery battery, who mistakenly identify it as a US Navy Curtiss Seagull scout plane.
At least 5 times searchlights picked him up, and on each occasion he managed to climb into the clouds and get away.
そうしましたらね、単焦とサーチライトでバーッと照らされましてね、そうしますとサーチライトで照らされると国籍がバレるじゃないですか。しかし日の丸消してるんですよ。明細だけでですね、日の丸とか星条旗とかみんな普通は国の識別が分かるようにしているんですが、わざと消しましてね。
He was certainly seen, but nobody seems to have concluded that this was in fact a Japanese plane. And there was some speculation that his aircraft looked rather similar to the float planes that were carried by the USS Chicago.
Flying on over Garden Island, Ito finds what he's looking for: a cluster of Allied warships. The jewel in the crown is the Augusta-class heavy cruiser USS Chicago.
これならば特殊潜航艇が攻撃するのにまず不足はないなということで高度を上げて、といっても500メーターぐらいまでで、今度はノースヘッドの方を起点にして、といっても近くですからね、潜水艦に戻りかけたんです。
Having surveyed the harbour for 50 minutes, Ito is again flying over open sea.
船の方に、潜水艦の方に単焦灯をつけてくれるか要求してみようって。で、この辺だろうというところで単焦灯をつけ けてほしいという暗号電報を打ちましたらね、ピカッとつけてくれたんです。あ、おったということ。それでやっと潜水艦が見つかりましてね。
Ito is forced to make a dangerous night landing on a rough swell.
真夜中でも白波がこう立ってるのがよく見えるんですね。あ、これダメだぞ岩崎君っていうようなことで。
As Ito's float plane hits the waves, it flips.
気がついたらこれちょうど180度ひっくり返りましてね、私は地球の中心に頭が向いていました。今度浮かないんですよ。ガブガブ水飲むんです。そのうちにまさにグロッキーになろうとした時に潜水艦が近づいてきてロープを投げてくれたんです。まあね、溺れる者は藁をもつかむいうでしょ。ロープ掴んでよかったんですよ。潜水艦まで引き上げてもらいましてね。そしてグロッキーになりながらもそれでもやっぱりね、海軍士官が無様な格好できませんし、みんな見てるでしょ。だから元気出して、直立不動の姿勢で謝って、その頃ですから陛下の飛行機を壊しましてって言ってやるわけですよ。
Armed with Ito's reports, Sasaki determines to press ahead with the attack the following night.
やっぱり自分の報告が正確であってほしいということは、翌日3隻のこの特殊潜航艇がまあ命を捨てに入っていくんですから、正確じゃないとあの人たちが犬死にしてしまうことになるから。
Cruising below the surface at reduced speed, the 5 monster submarines of the Eastern Attack Group are now clustered in a loose formation as they move towards Sydney Heads. On board the mother submarines, the mood is somber as the crews make their preparations for a mission from which none of them expects to return. Aboard the I-22, Captain Argetta implores Matsuo and his navigator to make every effort to return.
Admiral Yamamoto had always made it clear that he wanted the crew of the midget submarines to return to the mother submarines, and plans were made that the mother submarines would wait off the ports where the attacks were being conducted for several days for the midgets to return. So there was no sense that it was going to be a suicide operation. But according to Captain Yamaki, one of the 4 commanders, the men of the midget submarine program felt that it would be unfair of them to try and make it back to the mother submarines because it would put the lives of 400 men on those 4 mother submarines, or 300 as the case may be when one was lost, at risk for the sake of 8 men in the midgets.
基本的にはやはり生きて帰ってくると、生きて母艦に戻るといったのがその作戦の思想であり、その指揮官としても戻ってくることを願って彼らを送り出していったと。ただしやはりこれはこの作戦の性質上、実際に派遣する彼ら、また指揮官の彼らにとっても生還するのはかなり厳しい現実は認識できていたんだろうなと。 確かに矛盾はありますけれども、そういう思いで彼らを売り出していったんだろうなというふうに思ってます。
While still submerged, the crews transfer from the mother submarines to the midgets through an access hatch, sealing the bulkhead doors behind them. Waiting silently as the mother submarines prepare to launch. The three crews carry with them accurate charts, aerial reconnaissance photographs, and enough rations to sustain them for 1 week. But the midget's storage batteries will be exhausted after 12 hours of continuous operation. All power will be lost, and the craft will die.
The Type A midget may have been a disposable submarine, but it wasn't a kamikaze craft. And the other major limitation of the design, and this was something which was designed in on purpose, was that it ran on batteries and it had a limited range. Now, at a low battery use, a low speed, 5 knots, you could go nearly a couple of 100 kilometres in this submarine. But if you got up to the speed at which perhaps intercepting ships like destroyers might be travelling, maybe 20, 25 knots, then you had 30 odd minutes of power. And that meant that in a battle situation, the submarine could very rapidly be in trouble.
At 5:21, Matsuo's craft, the M21, is the first to leave its mother submarine.
The idea was that the submarine would be launched, had the capacity to move up and attack an enemy vessel, and following that could return to Japanese forces. At that stage the crew would be rescued. It wasn't really intended that the submarine could be recovered. It couldn't be recharged, it was battery powered, so the idea was to use the submarine to deliver the crew back to safety. It's an unusual idea of a weapon. There were experiments in fleet submarines during the First World War, and during the Second World War other nations did work on midget submarines, but the Japanese Type A is quite a substantial vessel. It's 23 metres long, 46 tonnes. It's a serious ship, and as a result it's really quite unlike any of the other midget submarines designed and used during the Second World War.
Tuman's M14 follows 7 minutes later.
In the control cabin, that 2 metre wide cylinder is only a bit over 2 metres long before you hit a bulkhead at each end, a watertight bulkhead. And in that space there are 2 crewmen, a periscope, and a plethora of equipment, devices like compasses, control systems for the submarine, electrical controls, all the things you needed to operate a complex vessel. And because of this, the space was tremendously cramped.
Lieutenant Ban in the M24 is the last of the 3 to launch. The entire launch has taken less than 20 minutes.
The people who crewed and operated the Type A midgets were really doing something that was really tough, and to fight a vessel like that successfully really is a statement of their skill, I think, and their determination to do the job.
The 5 submarines of the Eastern Attack Group set a course south for Port Hacking, where they will await the midget's return. Through darkening skies, the sweep of the Macquarie Light on outer South Head is already visible. Ahead of them lies 8 miles of open ocean. Then they will face the bristling defences of Sydney Harbour itself, as they push on for another 3 miles to Garden Island, where the target warships lay at anchor.
Because of the way it was designed, suffered from problems of controllability. For instance, working around a coast you have strong currents, areas of shallows. Control becomes a much bigger issue, and that's where the real problem was with the Type A midget.
The night was a difficult night for the type of operation that they were trying to undertake. Poor weather in terms of wind and chop, an unfamiliar harbour, no matter how much preparation, when you're actually in there doing the job that you need to do.
At a cruising speed of 10 knots, the midgets expect to approach Sydney Heads in approximately 2 hours.
But boxing is my subject. To make a good boxer, you must have a good right hand, you see. The gentleman is talking to you.
Whilst the crews of the Chicago and Perkins enjoy shore leave, Captain H.D. Bode of the USS Chicago and a party of his senior officers are being entertained at Tresco, the harbour mansion of Rear Admiral Gerard Muirhead Gould, commander of Sydney's harbour defence.
Well, Rear Admiral Muirhead Gould had a fairly distinguished record, as you would expect, to reach that rank. But he'd had health problems and he'd been sent out to Australia because he was considered not fit for sea duty anymore.
And that's why he was the commander of Sydney Port, which was traditionally a command that was given to someone prior to their retirement.
Muirhead Gould, 53, is an Englishman on loan from the Royal Navy and is himself an ex-submariner from World War I.
One has to understand that over half the men in the Navy were Royal Navy sailors or officers. All our officers continued to be trained in the UK for their specialist courses, gunnery, all those sort of things. So there's an ongoing tradition of linkage with the Royal Navy. And in fact, one could well argue that in World War II, the Navy was more closely aligned to the Royal Navy than our Army was to the British Army.
Further north, Sydney Harbour. Tuman's M14 is the first of the 3 midget submarines to arrive at the Heads. The Macquarie Light and the Inner South Head Light assist Tuman to fix his position. As planned, Tuman's midget is the first of the 3 to enter through the Heads. The early warning of a vessel's approach is provided by 6 magnetised indicator loops, strung across the seabed spanning the entrance to the outer harbour, with another 2 loops inside. In theory, it is impossible for enemy vessels to enter the harbour without detection.
The preparations consisted of 2 types of defences, a magnetic loop and the construction of a boom from Middlehead over to where Nelson's Park currently is at the moment. Anyone trying to attempt to enter the harbour underwater would be snagged in this heavy cross-hatched chain and timber. The construction of the boom commenced in February 1942 and was still under construction by the end of May 1942.
On the day of the attack, 2 of the outer loops are out of order. Signatures from the midgets are only ever obtained from one of the 2 inner loops, loop number 12. In a strategy for which the crews have been specifically trained, Tuman waits for a Manly ferry and then tucks himself inside its wake. Both vessels cross the indicator loop together at 8:01 p.m. The midget submarine signature goes unnoticed.
You'd have to say that up till when they got to the boom, the attack was going well. Hadn't been detected. There was no reaction from our forces to them.
Having successfully negotiated the gate and with the inner harbour now open before him, Tuman makes a fateful decision. he charts a course down the inside length of the boom toward the western gate. The eastern channel is narrow and requires precise navigation. Larger shipping only enter or leave the harbour through the deeper western channel. One theory suggests that Tuman's mission, as the first of the midgets into the harbour, was to sink a vessel in the vicinity of the western gate, effectively closing the harbour. In any event, it was a catastrophic decision. Within minutes, Tuman's midget is captured by the strong current and thrown against the torpedo boom, where it snares in the steel mesh. Less than 15 minutes after entering Sydney Harbour, the M14 situation has become desperate. The midget is spiked in a spider's web of steel. Tuman and Amori are helplessly trapped and just moments away from discovery. Maritime Services Board watchman James Cargill is on duty at the punt alongside the western gate. Cargill sees an object caught in the boom net and decides to investigate. The object resembles nothing Cargill has ever seen before. Concerned, Cargill reports his findings to Sub-Lieutenant Harold Ayres, captain of the Euroma and commander of the 2 patrol boats on duty that night.
I went on watch at 8 o'clock at night, 2000. As I was standing there, about 2010, I heard splashings of an oars. I called to the person in the rowing boat, "Do you hear there? What is your duty?"
Tuman and Amori understand that every moment they remain undetected assist their colleagues' chances of pressing home a successful attack.
When he approached and said there was something in the net, we then immediately told him that we would meet him at near the west gate.
The second of the subs, Bands M24, is about to cross the magnetic indicator loop. For the second time that night, a midget submarine positions itself in the wake of a Manly ferry and crosses the loop undetected. Over the course of the next hour, Ayres makes many attempts to radio the finding to naval intelligence.
We tried for some time, both on wireless and Aldous to Watson's depot and the wireless to Garden Island, but we could never get any answer back.
The initial reaction to the reports of submarine in the harbour was slow, but that's because more due to the communications of the age rather than anyone not doing the right thing in terms of trying to get the message out.
Owing to the fact that there was only 10 feet of water, we could not approach closely to the net.
Drawing 3 feet of water, the Euroma's ASDEC underwater detection equipment placed beneath the hull accounts for another 4.
As we looked, we could more or less see there was something there in a shape. But the shape looked so big, it seemed to be that it could have been something like a mine. But owing to the fact that all you could see were this black thing sticking up in the air, in no way did we think it was a submarine, because all we could see was the forward part sticking in the air.
Finally, Ayres gets through to Garden Island and reports the presence of a suspicious object. As the Lolita stands off, he is ordered to close and provide a full description. However, is reluctant to put the Euroma's ASDEC equipment at risk.
So we said to Mr. Cargill, would he like to take the stoker so that he could recognise it and come back, and then we knew exactly what it was. So they very leisurely rowed towards the archival.
As he does so, Ban, in the M24, passes unnoticed through the eastern gate, entering the inner harbour. Cargill, accompanied by a stoker, engine mechanic Bill Nangle, approach within an oar's length of the M14. For the first time that night, the conning tower of the M14 has become visible. Bill Nangle realises that the mystery object is a submarine, a baby submarine.
And then you could hear the O's when they seen the object, and the rowing boat immediately turned round and come back like a speedboat as fast as they could, and all they're saying, it's a submarine, it's a submarine.
Ayres confirms the presence of the submarine to Garden Island and requests permission to open fire. But on the Lolita, Captain Herbert Tubby Anderson has already decided to close in and release the first of his depth charges. Lolita's depth charge is set to explode at too great a depth. It comes to rest harmlessly on the harbour bed. Truman and Amori, realising they have been identified, brace as Anderson launches another, with the same result. At Tresco, Captain Bode and his officers are already making their way back to the Chicago when Muirhead Gould receives news of a submarine at the Western Gate.
Admiral Muirhead Gould took some time to take action. It wasn't until 10:27 that night that he ordered the general alarm, and he also gave instructions that all shipping was to continue moving about the harbour ferries and so on were to keep going.
As the alarm goes out, Tubby Anderson on the Lolita is preparing to launch a third depth charge. The submariners Truman and Amori know there can be no escape from the port's defenders. The midget explodes, and the enormous blast echoes all around the amphitheatre of the harbour. Sydney-siders in their hundreds emerge from the streets and the suburbs. And the night's attack has claimed its first 2 lives.
We didn't expect this in any manner at all. We realised that it was caught, but we didn't think anybody would kill themselves, because some had to say that's death.
In the inner harbour, Ban and Ashibe, in the M24, continue their course towards Garden Island. Ban's task is a difficult one. Like his colleagues at Pearl Harbor, he too has problems holding his craft at periscope depth.
The Type A midget, because of the way it was designed, suffered from problems of controllability. Because of the small size of the vessel, keeping it to run steady, particularly on the surface, proved to be very difficult. There are 2 very large lead balance weights in the submarine, and in addition it carried many small lead weights which the crew were expected to distribute backwards and forwards in the submarine, depending on how it was behaving at the time. So there was a lot of judgment called for just keeping the submarine on an even keel.
Like Ban, Matsuo and Suzuku have taken longer than expected to reach the heads, only now attempting to bring the third midget into the attack. Following the destruction of the M14 15 minutes before, the harbour patrol vessels are on high alert. Before Matsuo can steer his vessel across the indicator loop, he is spotted by the Naval Auxiliary Patrol boat, Loriana.
When the war broke out, the Navy needed some auxiliary vessels in harbours such as Sydney, and there were half a dozen former pleasure cruisers were converted to naval use and put in command of junior naval officers.
The Loriana captures Matsuo's conning tower in their searchlight, only 20 to 25 metres distant. The midget appears to be making 5 to 6 knots on a direct course for the eastern gateway.
The patrol boats in Sydney Harbour were commanded mainly by volunteer reserve officers. They weren't commanded by permanent Navy. Frustratingly for the crew, the Loriana's promised depth charges have not yet arrived. The launch is effectively unarmed. They report their sighting and lose the sub. 2 minutes later, it is spotted again by the Yandra,
a 900-ton anti-submarine vessel. As Matsuo frantically orders a crash dive, the Yandra attempts to ram the M21. A slight impact is felt on the bridge, and the midget is seen to surface after the Yandra's hull, listing at 15 degrees. Roaring in at full speed, she drops a pattern of 6 depth charges set to 30 metres. For the second time in 20 minutes, the harbour is rocked by a devastating series of explosions. There is no sign of the submarine. At almost exactly the same moment, having navigated the inner harbour and located the assembled warships, Band sights the USS Chicago at anchor through his periscope 500 yards off the Chicago starboard quarter. It is a sitting duck.
Well, I started as an ordinary seaman, second class they used to call it. When you're under 18, you're ordinary seaman, second class. The night of the attack, I was on board the Bungaree. It was the largest mine layer in the world at the time, but also the slowest. Most mine layers, especially in the RN, the Royal Navy, they travelled about 40 knots. Bungaree was flat out at 12.
Although Muirhead Gould has put out 2 general alarms, the harbour is still well lit.
The Bungaree was tied just close to Garden Island. We was about 50 yards away from the Chicago. I'd gone up onto the deck and sat on the forecastle on one of the bollards, watching the Manly ferries and activity on the Chicago, American cruiser that was close by, and feeling sorry for myself for being a Sydney native and coming from Manly, watching the Manly ferries go up the harbour, and I wasn't on one of them.
From high on the Chicago searchlight platform, the M24 is sighted. Realising he has been captured in the powerful 36-inch searchlight, Band dives.
I was just about to decide to go to bed and the alarm bells rang. I was right at my action station because I was sitting on the forecastle and my action station was on the 12-pounder gun. And all the fellas are racing up on the deck and they're all complaining, what silly so-and-so rang the alarm bells, we're in Sydney Harbour, you know.
Resurfacing alongside the Chicago. So close, the gun crews cannot lower their sights below the safety rail to target him, and then submerges for a second time. Resurfacing moments later, further north.
Then the Chicago had come to life and they got searchlights going all over the harbour, and they illuminated a Japanese sub between them and Fort Denison.
Able to take aim now, the gun crews rake the area toward Fort Denison with shells and red tracer fire.
We trained onto the midget sub with our gun, and through the telescopic sight, I could see the little Japanese in the conning tower looking around. He was as though he was disorientated, looking to see what was going on. All this only took about 10 seconds, and just as we lined him up, he disappeared.
Amidst almost continuous machine gun fire, shell fire and flares, Rear Admiral Muirhead Gould finally gives the order to darken all ships.
Sometime later at 11:14 he did give the order that all ships were to be darkened, but no order was given at that time to turn off the lights at the graving dock, the very big cranes and things at Garden Island.
The Chicago continues to sweep the area with its searchlights, but can find no trace of the M24. In the uneasy calm that follows the first stage of the attack, Muirhead Gould and his staff officer head up the harbour toward the western gate.
We was laying off in the deeper water when the Commodores of the Sydney's barge came up alongside, indicated that the Commodore was coming aboard. He went into the wheelhouse, with our commanding officer. The commanding officer was telling the Commodore about what has happened in the net and the submarine blowing itself up.
With Tuman's sub now lying at the bottom of the harbour, there is little for the Rear Admiral to see.
Some of those Australian naval members he spoke to that night suggest that his manner was rather facetious and offhand and tending to be a bit sceptical about claims that there were Japanese submarines in the harbour.
As he makes his personal inspection of the scene, the floodlights on the huge graving dock at Garden Island remain lit, backlighting the Chicago from end to end.
I was stationed on the Kuttabul for 1 week. That was all. I was watchkeeping on a gun crew. Not that I knew anything or had anything to do with the gun, but it was to give them a break for a tea break or something. They had to have somebody there to do it, so they used us, any ratings that were living on the Kuttabul, and that was, I suppose, to get you food and lodgings.
As sightings of Japanese submarines are continually transmitted to the Garden Island Operations Room, reports of the events unfolding in Sydney Harbour have not yet made it aboard the HMAS Kuttabul, a converted seaferry used to house naval ratings and tied to the wharf on Garden Island.
I was given sentry duty on Kuttabul steps where the vessel was actually moored. I'd started my shift from 8 o'clock until 12 o'clock at night, but when 12 o'clock came, my relief didn't turn up, and I waited for him for a while, because I was on a 4 hour, 4 off, 4 hours on and 4 hours off shifts, watches, and about 12:15, I ran from where I was onto the Kuttabul. I knew where he slept, and I went and woke him up, and I ran back and I waited for him to come down. He came down about 12:25, and fortunately said something that was to eventually save my life.
BAB positions the M24 in readiness for the assault on the USS Chicago. At this very moment, the lights silhouetting their chosen target are extinguished.
And he said, "Sleep in my hammock." So I went on to the Kuttabul and went up onto the upper deck and got into his hammock. But I'd taken my shoes off, my boots off, and I settled back in it, and I actually dozed off in the short time there.
With the loss of visual assistance, Band's ability to accurately target the Chicago has severely diminished.
I was supposed to be woken at 11:45 to be on watch at midnight. But the guy didn't turn up, did he? I was thinking about getting up and getting onto my watch, because I knew the bloke at the gun would be looking at his watch and wondering where on earth his shift was.
In the darkness, Band steadies the M24, then orders a Shebay to fire the first of their 2 torpedoes. The torpedo veers off course, passing in front of the Chicago, underneath the Dutch submarine K9, running on toward the Garden Island wharf.
And I was scrambling out of my hammock just after midnight, and just got my feet on the deck, and bang, she went.
Apart from the noise of the explosion, I couldn't hear anything else. Not that I was deafened by anything, but I just wasn't conscious of anything else.
I honestly think that the small fire from the Chicago had sunk him, you know. But shortly after that, while we were closed up for about I should say 10 minutes or something, and next thing, this terrific explosion, we seen the torpedo hit the Kuttabul.
At that same moment, Muirhead Gould has concluded his discussions with the crews of the Yoroma and Lolita.
The Commodore was just about ready to leave when all of a sudden was another explosion up the harbour. And he said to me, "What was that?" I said, "It sounded like an underwater explosion to me, sir." He looked at me and just said, "Thank you," got into his boat and then set sail for his residence.
I think the first thought was just sheer panic, as to get off as quickly as I could, because it was a matter of survival. The vessel was sinking pretty rapidly.
You could feel it listing, you see, going down. Something's hit it.
There was a loud explosion. There was a geyser of water right up in the air and smoke. And then she just settled down like a tired old lady and sat on the bottom of the harbour.
And I thought, now, there's only one way out, and that was down the gangway, because I was up on the upper deck, you see. And the gangway ashore was on the deck below. So I tried to walk, I couldn't walk, so I got down on my behind and got down the gangway that way into the water. And when I got down to the bottom, that's how I got hit on the head with a beam or some such thing.
I found my way eventually in the darkness to the steps. Lowered myself into the water, took a sort of a deep breath, and as I went down I got washed back up virtually, and I was caught in the stairwell, and I swam underwater, and as the years have gone, people have commented to me I must have swum through all the wreckage and where the bodies were, because that was where all the damage was, and eventually found the exit, and I found my way to the seawall, and I climbed up there, and a rating came running up to me in the dark, and first words he said, "Where are all the officers?" And I said, I don't know, I don't think anybody's alive, I think everybody's dead. I wasn't conscious of any movement or noise or anything, it was just sort of me standing there until this rating went up, and then of course then after that others came out, and they took me off into the hospital, and I was admitted suffering from shock and immersion. The shock part was pretty true, because it was certainly a frightening experience.
Next thing I knew, I was in Prince of Wales Hospital in Randwick. I opened my eyes, and on the wall was a clock, and it had 3 o'clock on it. It was at that stage that the surgeon commander was leaning over me and saying, "They got to come off. They got to come off." He said, "But I can't do it now. My anaesthetist has gone home, and I can't bring him back. But I'll take him off in the morning, just make him comfortable." Strangely enough, I never had a mark on my ankles, but it was a concussion, smashed everything that was available in my bones and my feet and my ankles. They were just the outside skin was holding them on. Everything was broken in underneath there. And then in the morning, of course, the surgeon commander turned around the sick bay tiffy and congratulated him. He said, "That's good thinking," because he put them on back splints, you see, and round them up with bandages. And then when they took the bandages off in theatre, my feet stayed there. And the surgeon commander said, "Cool, I think we can save these."
The force of the explosion destroys the Kuttabul and kills 21 sailors, 19 Australian and 2 British. 10 more are injured.
Strangely enough, before it all happened, I can't remember any noise on the harbour. So I was surprised there was, with all the activity on the harbour, that somebody didn't say, "Well, look, they're coming in." I knew nothing. And innocently, I just went on to the Kuttabul and walked almost to my death.
And the only consolation I thought about is that the guy that was supposed to have waken me, he'd have been there instead of me, so it's...
The torpedo had hit the retaining wall against Garden Island, detonating underneath the Kuttabul.
The Type 97 torpedo is a little smaller than the usual torpedoes carried by Japanese submarines. It has a different method of propulsion. The Type 97 is innovative in that it has an oxygen-based propulsion system. They weigh just under a tonne. They have 350 kilos of explosive in them. They have the power to really sink a ship, and when they did hit ships, they knocked at least very large holes in them.
With the first of his torpedoes away, Ban and Ashibe worked frantically to regain control of the midget.
Now, if you fired the torpedoes, instantly the tube was open to the sea and a massive amount of seawater flowed in, and the submarine was immediately out of trim, much heavier at the nose than it had been before.
Now, in control, Ban releases his second and final torpedo. Again, the shot goes wide.
And the torpedo passed between the Chicago's stern and our bow. Whether or not it fired at the Chicago, whether it fired us and missed both, I don't know.
The torpedo runs aground on rocks at Garden Island and this time fails to explode. The harbour defence craft immediately launch intensive patrols.
Well, naturally, being trained, we followed the wake to see if we see who fired the torpedo. Well, at the end of that, we didn't see anybody.
Eluding the defences, Ban and Ashibe are able to slip away.
Something swung that torpedo shot offline that Ban was able to make. He had a great target, he was in exactly the right position, he'd spent a lot of time getting there, and the torpedo, which is a good torpedo, misses. And I suspect it was because of this effect of the water currents within the harbour on a vessel this small.
At 1:58 a.m, the M24 crosses the inner indicator loop, making for the heads and the open sea beyond. In anticipation for their return, the flotilla of mother submarines will wait off Port Hacking for 3 more days. Yet the M24 is never seen again. Following their encounter with the Yandra, Matsuo and Suzuku have sat patiently on the bottom for 4 hours, conserving the midget's battery power. Now, they are ready to resume the mission. It is almost 3 a.m. Whether by chance or design, Matsuo brings the M21 to the surface at the same moment the Chicago was passing South Head, on her way to what Captain Bode assumes will be the greater safety of the open ocean. The Chicago sights Matsuo's periscope almost alongside and sends off a submarine entering harbour signal. A minute later, an inward crossing is recorded on the indicator loop. Matsuo successfully negotiates the entrance to the boom gate and enters the inner harbour. 2 more of the Hollywood fleet of converted pleasure cruisers, Steady Hour and Sea Mist, have now been ordered to patrol for submarines between Bradley's Head and the boom defence. They are joined by their sister ship, Yoroma.
We did get a ping on a submarine, and seeing it was nearer to the outer part of the harbour, we did move up and down the seaside so we could send the submarine further up the harbour, because we were acting in another area at the time, and we chased it up towards Taylor Bay. The next thing was the other 2 Hollywood fleet did sight the midget submarine.
At 5 a.m, Sea Mist observes a dark object with its conning tower protruding a metre above the water. Lieutenant Andrew, in command of the Sea Mist, reacts with haste, firing off a flare to warn off other shipping, then races to the spot where the midget has dived, dropping a depth charge.
We've been told to set the depth charges to explode at 15 metres below the surface, which was very, very dangerous, given that the explosion of all that TNT was going to perhaps damage or destroy his own vessel. He thought that 30 metres would have been a safer depth, as indeed it would have been. But because it was very shallow water in Taylor's Bay, where Matsuo was, he followed the order to set it for 15 metres, and that proved to be exactly right.
180 kilograms of TNT explodes, lifting Sea Mist forward on a wall of water, damaging her engines.
He crippled this Japanese submarine, which wouldn't have happened had he used a 30-metre setting. So although he was experienced, he followed the instructions. He didn't like the instructions, and he was very successful.
The M21 rises to the surface, inverted, with its contra-rotating propellers revolving inside their steel cage. Sea Mist retires from the fray as Steady Hour and Euroma now close in.
As we raced in to drop the last depth charge, I was certainly saying plenty of words about the Japanese coming to my harbour.
Over the next 3.5 hours, 17 depth charges are dropped over contacts in Sydney Harbour. In the deceptive period of twilight and shadow-born illusion of a growing dawn, it is thought that Matsuo and Suzuku took their own lives.
It's believed that Matsuo may in fact have shot his crewman and then turned the gun on himself, but nobody seems to quite know why it was that he didn't seek to destroy his submarine as Truman had done in the net earlier.
Possibly unable to reach their scuttling charges during the constant battering, the midget lays on the bed of Taylor's Bay, its propellers still slowly turn, as Sydney siders awake to the city's biggest news story of the entire war. As the Kuttabul rests in the still waters of Sydney Harbour, her 21 dead are buried.
They were recovered from the wreck, and they were given full military honours at a naval funeral, and they were buried as a group at Brookwood Cemetery in Sydney.
There were two Englishmen. I befriended one of them very much, and they were both on the Kuttabul waiting for transport back to England. One of them, the guy that I felt so sorry for, was waiting to get back to England to see his wife and his baby he had never seen, but he was killed on it. It was Frank Kirby.
One must remember, though, that 21 Australian and British sailors died in this attack, and that to us is not acceptable.
As days pass, hope to recover the submariners is fading.
やっぱりですね、この特殊潜航艇の攻撃というのは帰ってくる手段は講じてありますけれども、現実には 全く帰ってこれない 100% 戦死する、どういうふうな最後を遂げたかという情報が全くありませんでした。
バンさんと足部2人だけがいまだにわからないわけですね。だから皆さんいろんな噂するんだけども、私の兄貴の将軍から言うて、おそらく魚雷を発射してから湾岸へ出て、もう自爆特殊潜航艇を爆薬で自分も一緒にシドニー郊外湾の外で自爆してるんじゃないかなと思ってるんですが。
Accordingly, after their 3-day vigil, the 5I class submarines broke formation.
親兄弟に誰にも言わなかったんですがね、私にだけはこれは内緒だで、誰も言ったらダメ、秘密だけども、特殊潜航艇とは言わ なかったんですが、2人乗りの船で戦争が始まったらすぐに私は一番に行って戦死して大手柄を立てるんだと見つけていただいたら、番艇のかけらでもいいから一かけらでも欲しいんです。今とこ申し上げて4人戦死してるけど、誰も遺骨も何も遺品も何もないんです。だからせめて番艇の一かけらでも引き上げたらいいのになと思ってるんですが。
The operation to salvage the submarines began 7 days later. A Titan heavy lifting crane moved into position. The 2 midget submarines were raised.
They brought the subs on barges, and the crane from Crocodile Dock picked the sub up and dropped it on Clark Island. I took a photo with an old box camera. I was amazed at how small they were. It was the first time I could realise that 2 men could fit in them.
The bodies of Matsuo and Suzuku and the remains of Chuman and Omori were recovered, and in a controversial decision by Admiral Muirhead Gould, the 4 Japanese submariners were cremated 2 days later and given full naval honours at a ceremony at the Eastern Suburbs crematorium.
The scene is one of quiet simplicity, the occasion of the cremation of 4 brave men who have died for their country. A country whose policies are viewed with abhorrence by us, but whose brave men in death are honoured as all brave men are honoured throughout the world.
先に第1回特別攻撃隊指揮官好きとして、さらにこの度は、丸指揮官として光栄ある任務に就く男子の本会、これに優るものなし。
The caskets of the Japanese naval men are being slowly carried between the ranks of the naval party.
顧みれば生を受けて26年、ひとときもご両親様のお心を案じ立てまつる暇もなく、発るこの度のありがたき任務について、私最後の孝行とお褒めくださりたく候。
The firing party has followed the caskets to the cremation chapel. Slowly, slowly and with measured tread, the caskets are now being carried up the aisle of the chapel.
何とぞ心に、何ら心に残ることもなく、知るにを感謝しつつ、ご両親様のご長命と皆様のご幸福を祈ってお別れ申し上げ候。5月27日、KY。
Each and all of them still covered by the flag of the rising sun, the symbol which they had died to serve.
道場の鈴木正夫上等兵は私の最も信頼する部下にて誠に優秀な人物にござ候。兵装のご両親様には誠に申し訳なく次第父上様お尋ねの上よろしくお伝えくださりたく候。郷里は先の通りでございますということで、岐阜県の鈴木兵装長のご自宅の住所を書いております。以上です。
The caskets having been placed in the cremation chamber, the officer gives the final orders, and the firing party salutes the dead.
Return! Fire! Go!
The ashes of the four were returned by circuitous diplomatic channels to Japan.
鎌倉丸という船で、帰ってまいりましたけれども、写真を見ますとものすごく大勢の母さんに出迎えていただいて、祖父や祖母も、よく任務を果たしてくれたというような気持ちで迎えたのじゃないかなと思っております。
It was criticised by some in Australia at the time, but not by many. There was a sense that, well, that was an honourable thing to do, a decent thing to do.
Muirhead Gould defended the decision in a radio broadcast.
I have been criticised for having accorded these men military honours. Theirs was a courage which is not the property or the tradition or the heritage of any one nation. It is the courage shared by the brave men of our own countries as well as of the enemy. And however horrible war and its results may be, it is a courage which is recognized and universally admired. These men were patriots of the highest order. How many of us are really prepared to make 1,000th of the sacrifice that these men have made?
From a naval point of view, it was the proper thing to do. The submariners had been brave and courageous in their attack, and that was appreciated by Navy. And a defeated enemy in Navy is a defeated enemy, and you treat their remains accordingly. That's always been part of the naval tradition.
私個人的には実際に戦う人たちといったのはみんなそういう感情なり意識を持っていると思います。やはり祖国のために祖国を背負って戦っているわけなので、そこには相手の憎しみもあるかもしれませんけど、それ以上にお互い理解できる部分があるというふうに思います。ただしなかなかこれ実践するとなると難しいところだと思うんですね。でもオーストラリアの方々、オーストラリアの海軍の方々はそれをしっかりと実践してくださった。本当に騎士道精神にあふれる、また慈悲深い寛大な心を持っていたんだなと。またこれはオーストラリアの方々の誇りとするべき精神でありスピリットだと思っています。
Yet on the broader canvas of human experience, Muirhead Gould's words have continued to resonate through the years.
The action was greatly touched the people in Japan, the government and people more broadly, and the families. And Muirhead Gould is remembered now probably more for that action at the time of great conflict and hatred, for that gesture than he is for the fact that he may have been a little bit slow perhaps in responding to the initial attack.
Unaware of the preparations, the I-24 surfaced the night before the service being held for those they had lost.
By then the war, it was sort of turning a little bit our way. And of course the government had done all sorts of stupid things. They blew up the big concrete pillars on Bondi Beach, and a lot of that had stopped them. And they put tank traps on the way to Palm Beach. But as John said, with 13,000 miles around Australia of beaches and things, they didn't have to come to Bondi Beach if they wanted to land. It was silly.
On Monday, the 8th of June, she turned her heavy deck gun onto Sydney herself and prepared to shell.
I was 25 and I was living at Balfour Road, Rose Bay. Well, the night of the shelling, we'd just got home from visiting my husband's parents at Mossman. And my husband was very tired. He was working terrific hours at the airbase. So we fell into bed and he went to sleep straight away, but I didn't. And I suddenly heard this woof noise and then whoosh. And I, woof, whoosh. And I said, John, listen. I've never heard the guns make that noise on the golf links. Listen, John. And it was woof, whoosh. And this went on, and all of a sudden, woof, whoosh. And then beep, bang. Oh.
Captain Hunter-Basso, who was the commander of the I-24, the submarine which had brought Barnes' midget to Sydney, was about 9 miles south by southeast off Sydney Heads, and he opened fire with his 5.5-inch gun.
Oh, I think that submariners being submariners. They had the ability to do so. They didn't feel any threat in terms of anti-submarine forces being deployed against them. So surfacing off Sydney or Newcastle at night, manning a 4-inch gun and firing off some shells at the enemy would seem to be an appropriate thing to do if you had a quiet time in the mid-watch. And that's probably why they did it.
Well, I took a flying leap from my bed and I don't think I touched the floor in between. And we grabbed the first aid box, we shot down to the air raid shelter, picking up bedclothes on the way because Marge Martin had picked Judith out of the cot, bedclothes and all. She was very frightened. So would I have been if I'd had a little child like that. But we were at the back of the flats, so we didn't take the full blast. The flats in the front took the full blast. And John said, I think we'd better go and see if anyone's been hurt. And he went next door and he found a young couple hiding under the bedclothes, shaking, and the pieces of shrapnel had come through the double brick wall, hit the other walls, hit different things, hit the stove, made a lot of damage. And then I went back out to the air raid shelter and Mrs. Bauer had come down, spread the rug out, and I went to sit down and she said, you can't sit there, Ethel. That's for the mothers and babies. So, anyway, about half an hour after, the air raid siren went off. And the air raid wardens started coming around. But I said to my husband, aren't you supposed to go down and see that the big Shell 24, the big refuelling barge, is taken to safety? He said, Ethel, I've got 50,000 gallons of high-octane spirit down there in my tanks. He said, if a shell hits it, all Rose Bay's going up. He said, I'm no bloody hero. I'm not going down there to sit on top of it. That was that.
Japanese officers who were there say that their aim was to hit the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now, it's not entirely clear what a few shells from a Japanese submarine, what damage that could do to the harbour bridge. I think it was more a gesture, rather a futile gesture.
And when the shelling had all stopped, we all sort of packed ourselves up and went back in, and we all were in Marge Martin's flat, drinking coffee and talking. And John nursed the children to sleep. It was, looking back now, you know, there was no real panic or anything.
It wasn't considered to be a full-scale military attack. These were nuisance attacks and very much aimed at the psychology of the enemy rather than doing large amounts of physical harm to the enemy.
In the event, these diversionary strikes by Sasaki submarines produce few of the results that Yamamoto might have been hoping for.
But certainly I think to the citizens of Sydney, particularly in the short term, after the attack, the effect was significant. You could get very cheap eastern suburbs real estate after the attack.
In some respects, the midgets' raid on Sydney Harbour can be seen as an opening salvo in the most decisive battle of the Pacific War, Midway. A battle that would see the Japanese advance through the Pacific reach its zenith.
It's had its impact upon me, no doubt, and I'm perhaps a more forgiving person than I ever was in those very young days. But it has affected me, no doubt. I'm just a grateful man that I got through what others died in. Yeah.
当時のですね、ことを思いますと、やはりみんながしたくてやったわけではございませんので、やっぱりその時代はそうせざるを得なかったところがですね、お互いにあったのじゃないかなと思っております。
They were 6 very, very brave people, and I take my hat off to them. They were fine sailors, and all they thought was that they were doing something for their own country. And we've felt the same about our country, I should think. I'm an Australian, and there's no better country in the world as far as I'm concerned.
Now, 非常に平和で文化的な生活をできてますし、こんな立派な世になるとは毛頭考えてませんでした。まして敗戦になった日本ですからね、こんな生活をできるとは思ってなかったんですが、これも皆さんの兄弟たちのおかげかなと思って、今はいるとこなしの生活をして過ごしています。
I think people recognised the fact that they were very brave too, even though they were the enemy. You can recognise bravery when you see it. Although there was great sorrow over the Kuttabul being hit and the young cadets all being killed, that was very sad.
どのようにと言われると、私がね飛行機乗りになろうと思った頃は飛行機というのは大体よく落ちてましたので、飛行機が落ちるからそんなもん飛行機乗りパイロットになるようなことはやめろっていうのは周囲の声でしたけども、まあ人間一度は死ぬんだ。
My mother, who was a gallant soul, she pulled me aside and she said, "Look, Colin, you've got to learn to forgive." And I said, "I can forgive anything, Mother, but I can't forget." And there's a vast difference. And I still maintain that the day you forget anything, you might as well give up. You can forgive a lot of things, but you can never forget.
I don't think anyone liked war, like killing anybody. I mean, war's never solved anything. I mean, nobody wins a war. Doesn't matter what side you're on.